Thank you so much. Like Quinn said, I'm here because the Baptist Memorial people invited me. And we had such a exciting crowd when I was here last time. I said, you know, there's an extension to the presentation that I gave that I'm really kind of deeply passionate about. And the questions that I was getting from all of you in my email and on our website, and we got a ton of people now from Pensacola reading and engaging with our stuff. I said, let's see if we can squeeze this in and do this. So I thank you for coming out, for Quint, for Christian, for setting this up, and just thank you. Who was part of one of the two events that when I was here last time? So a huge percentage of you. Excellent. There will be maybe 5% overlap here. At the end of the evening presentation, why don't you just unplug the cord and plug it back in, see if that does it. You know, sometimes that works. At the end of the presentation last time, I showed you some small projects that were done, and we talked about the need to think small, how our best investments were these little small incremental things. And so tonight I want to kind of go through a process for doing that. When I was an engineer and worked for years as an engineer and then worked as a planner for cities around Minnesota, what I found was that I was involved in a whole lot of project development work. In fact, I found out pretty quick that I was not really cut out to be an engineer. There's kind of two types of engineers that work for consulting firms. One of them is the technical kind. The kind that sit down and work with spreadsheets and calculations and, you know, do all the numbers crunching stuff. I was horrible at that. That's what a real engineer is. The other kind is the kind that goes out and can BS at job sites and, you know, do project studies, speak in front of councils, do project management. That was the kind of stuff that I found that I was good at. Oh, you getting there? There we go, yay. So I found myself involved in a lot of project development work. And project development work involves a lot of public officials sitting around a table, all the smartest minds in the room, right? Deciding where we're gonna spend millions and millions of dollars. And as I was going through that process, it always made sense to me. I never really questioned it. I never really stepped back and said, you know, is there something wrong with this process? It seemed to me like the very logical thing to do. I had an advanced degree, I had a lot of training, we had the people who could make the decisions in the room. Of course we knew what needed to be done. We'd create these project priority lists, we'd say here's our top 5 projects, and then we'd go out and figure out how to get them done, and it was very common sense. It was only when I started to ask these strong towns questions, it was only when I got to the point of, okay, what we're doing is not working, how do we do things differently, that I got to the question we're going to talk about tonight, which is how do we actually do capital projects differently? You have this huge fund of money. What's this? I keep forgetting what the name of this fund is called, your big slush fund. The Triumph money, that's right. You have the Triumph money. And it's this very unique thing. So I want to talk about how we decide how to spend capital money, whether it's Triumph money, whether it's money that we would bond for, whether it's, you know, money in our budget. How do we decide as local governments, as collections of citizens, what our priorities are? This is my hometown. This is Brainerd, Minnesota. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Today it was actually almost 4 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul because we had a couple inches of snow last night and I had to drive 30 miles an hour for the first 70 miles of my trip because the roads were nasty and icy. I have actually been up since 12:30 a.m. Just to give you a sense of what travel in Minnesota sometimes forces you to do. This is my hometown. This is, just for orientation, this is Brainerd. Brainerd is the old railroad and logging town. The railroad comes through right through here and heads out. This is the railroad center. Brainerd was an old railroad town I actually live, there's a park in the middle of town, I actually live right there. That's my house, right up there. This is Baxter. Baxter is the neighboring town. They share a boundary line right here. Baxter is the neighboring town. It's the suburban strip town. So the Target, the Walmart, all the franchise fast food places, all that stuff is right there. I actually grew up on a farm right down here. That was a farm that was homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents. So this is where I grew up and where I live today. I'm very involved in the community. I am now today on the Planning Commission. But back when this project that we're going to talk about tonight to kick off got started, I wasn't. But I was one of those guys who reads the agendas when they come out, looks at the minutes, has read all the ordinances and plans. I'm just involved, and I'm involved because I love the community. I'm a part of the community, but I also have like expertise and knowledge in this area. So I just kind of keep up to speed with it. One day, I got the newspaper, and I looked on the front page, and the newspaper talked about this project. This is our airport out on the edge of town. I probably fly more than anyone in my community. I have not flown out of the Brainerd Airport in 3 years. It is one of those things where like it has flights at weird times to, you spend more time sitting in Minneapolis waiting for a connection than if you just drove down and drove back. So I rarely fly out of this airport. But this is our airport here. 2 flights a day to Minneapolis and back. On the front page of the paper, there was a story about at the legislature where they were asking for money to run sewer and water out to the airport. I had never heard of this project, and all of a sudden it was how at the legislature when everybody's figuring out who gets what money, and every legislature gets like their own project that they get put forward. This was our project. And I knew like all the projects in the pipeline. I had no clue where this one came from. What's going on? Sewer and water out to the airport. $7.1 million. Just to give you some context, our entire budget for a year is a little over $9 million. So in the context of our community, this is a huge project. I had never heard of it. I had never seen it discussed or debated. It was not on my radar at all. And like I said, I am actively involved in the community. I follow this stuff pretty closely. $7.1 million. The newspaper has a stringer. So Kevin, a stringer. They got someone who works at the Capitol who knows nothing about my city, but they write for all kinds of papers all over the place. So the stringer wrote an article about this. And of course, this newspaper probably got it at deadline, so they had to run it as is. The next day they did the follow-up story. And they said, what the heck is going on? Because the newspaper, like me, has people that are pretty involved. We are represented at this point by a DFLer. Does anyone know what the DFL is? Oh, this is so much fun. In Minnesota, we do not have the Democratic Party, the Democrat Party. We do not have, it does not exist in Minnesota. What we have is we have an amalgamation of the Democrat Party and the Farm Labor Party. They merged into one. Minnesota has this party called the DFL. You just saw Senator Franken resign. Senator Franken was not a Democrat. He was a part of the Democrat Farm Labor Party of Minnesota. So in my district, we were represented by a representative in the House, John Ward, who's with the DFL. I'm going to give you another little Minnesota history fact. This is Carrie Ruud. Carrie Ruud just this week won like woman legislator of the year or something like that in Minnesota. She was our senator. She was, when she was elected, not a Republican. She was part of the Independent Republican Party. In Minnesota, after Watergate, we said, we're not Republicans anymore. We are independent Republicans. We actually got rid of that after when the Gulf War, the last Gulf War started. We decided we're Republicans again. So she is now a Republican. But at the time, she was an independent Republican. The newspaper went to these two legislators and said, hey, you put forward in the House and in the Senate this request for $7.1 million. What in the world's going on? Like, where did this come from? And it was fascinating to read the quotes in the paper. John, who goes to my church, he's a really nice guy, I like him. John said, I listen to my constituents. This is what I was told people wanted. If this isn't what you want, let me know and we can change this project around and figure something else out. They went to Carrie and Carrie said, you know what, we've got to get this thing started. We've got to get this thing going. There's a deadline to put bills forward in committee. Let's get this put forward. Let's get the wheels moving down here at the Capitol. And then, if we decide we don't want this project, we can always, back out and do something different. The newspaper then called City Hall and they said, okay, these guys are all pointing the finger at you, saying that you were the ones who said this project should happen. What's going on? And the people at City Hall kind of hemmed and hawed for a day, and then they came back and they pulled out this memo from the state fire marshal. See, we had recently done a project out at the airport, our big airport. We got a grant from the federal government to put a jet bridge out. So instead of in 20 below, 30 below weather, getting off the plane and then walking across the tarmac, you get to now go through the, jetway, whatever it's called. Quite elegant for the 2 flights a day we get. We also built a restaurant, which again, ponder this for a second. You have one flight that goes out at 7 in the morning, another flight that comes in at like 9:30 at night. We now have a restaurant and a conference room. That was all part of this project that we did at the airport. So upon reviewing this project, the fire marshal issued a note to the city saying, because you have expanded the facility, you now need to increase your water capacity for fighting fires. And so the city issued a memo to the newspaper and said, the impetus was a state fire marshal demand that the airport improve its water capacity by April of 2016. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of engineer knowledge here. If you need to increase your fire capacity, there's a couple ways to do it. One way is to have like a tank in the ground with some water that if there's ever a fire, you could go out and pump on it. That would be like relatively cheap to do. At a maximum, maybe like $250,000, right? It's the kind of stuff that you can't get the legislature to fund for you. There's another way to do it though, and that is to run a big, huge pipe 1.5 miles out of town for $7.1 million or whatever. And you can get the legislature to do that. So what we decided to do is go ask the legislature for the money to do this. It was kind of fascinating because as soon as this hit the paper, there was a group of us who were active, involved, and kind of agitated by this. There's so many things that my city needs to do. Why in the world would we make this request at the legislature? Why would this be our top priority? This seems like something we could solve relatively easily. Why are we making this the thing that we're asking for? But then the talk around town started to percolate, right? The coffee shops, that stuff. Come on, Chuck. It's going to create jobs. We need jobs. At the time, we had the highest unemployment level in the state, something around 11%. Are you telling me we don't need jobs? Of course we need jobs. It's not going to cost us anything. And this money is going to come from the legislature. They're going to spend. If we don't do it, someone else is going to take this money and spend it. It's not going to cost us anything. Why would we not do it, Chuck? There's a lot of room for development. We got 1.5 miles of pipe in the ground now. Think of all the things we can hook up on the way out there, all the land that could be developed, all the property that could be put to a higher use. And then of course, Chuck, it's, think about the children. There's a safety issue here. I mean, you heard what the fire marshal said. You don't want blood on your hands. Let's just get this done, right? We don't want to do things halfway. Let's make sure that everybody's going to be safe. So this is the conversation now that starts to take place. We hear people from the chamber come out and say these things. We hear people from the Economic Development Association come out and say these things. College president comes out and weighs in that this is an important thing. What happens? Well, the legislature does allocate us some money, right? But what do? They don't give us the full amount. That would be silly, right? They have lots of people who want money. the further they can spread that dollar amount they have, the better off they are. So they offer us just enough to make it hurt, right? And they come back and say, well, if you really want this, you're going to have to kick in a little bit too, right? You're going to have some skin in the game. So all of a sudden it went from it's not going to cost us anything to now we gotta come up with some money on our own. Of course, this starts to irritate people. So what happens? All the organizations then start to show up. The engineering firms, the realty organizations, the non-governmental organizations, and they start to say things like, this is an important thing for our community. We have to have this airport because of tourism. If we don't do this, they're going to shut us down. The fire marshal is going to end the life of our city. We have to do this. We have to make this investment. So of course, what happens? The city comes up with $1.5 million, and we secure the funding. This is what I've called the project development process, right? And at the end of the day, it ends with a fully funded project that we can now move forward from, right? What's missing from this project development process? There's one like glaring thing that exists within the community that is not shown anywhere on this project development flow chart. What's missing?
No decision on whether it was a good idea.
Yeah, but even let's forget that. We don't worry about those kind of things. You paid too much attention last time. You actually took that seriously, like we would investigate whether the project made financial sense. No, we don't do that.
I've seen it in action.
What is missing here? What's not here?
No money coming in on here.
Well, what's missing here is that the community hasn't been engaged at all in this. We haven't talked to people. In order to have a good project, we have to actually go out and talk to people, right? We have to find out what the masses want. So now we've got a fully funded project. We're all ready to go. What do we need to do? We need to go out and talk to people. So we go out and we hold a public hearing. We give people the three options. You know, we call these the dumb, dumber, and the dumbest option, right? Option number one is we run a $20 million gold-plated pipe out to the airport that will solve every problem from now until the end of time. Option number two, we do nothing and the airport gets shut down by the fire marshal and we lose our entire tourism industry. Option number three, we do this very reasonable thing that, by the way, we already have funding from the legislature to do. What option would you like, public?
One.
Right? And we wonder why people get angry. We wonder why people show up mad. We wonder why they're disillusioned with the process. What we need to do is we need to take this process here and we need to flip it on its head. We need to change it around completely so that we start the conversation from a very different place. And we orient our conversations in a very different way. There's a saying out of Silicon Valley that goes like this: innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. Oop. We have a preference. If you think about this and I said, what would you prefer? Dumb or smart? Everyone's going to say, well, we would prefer smart, right? But if you sit back and think about it, if I said, do you prefer order or chaos? We have an incredibly strong preference for order. We will tolerate a whole lot of dumb in order to have order. That is a hallmark of affluent societies. And if you doubt me, think of the next time when you're sitting at a traffic signal at 2 a.m, right? You will sit there for a long time. You will be really, really dumb because of your commitment to order, right? I want to show you this an example in the city, and this is what I ended my last talk with. So we're going to expand on this a little bit here. This is, anybody? Memphis, Tennessee. Does anybody in this room besides me know the story of this building? Yeah, you do, okay. This is the Memphis Pyramid. Let me just say something about Memphis. I love Memphis. I think Memphis is a beautiful city full of great people. Memphis bought into, after World War II, the entire development model that the country was embracing. They did it with a gusto. They ran the highways through the middle of the city. They ripped out all their streetcar lines. They ripped down buildings to build parking lots. They extended sewer and water out further and further. They built a beltway. They kept going out further yet. They built a second beltway. They paid businesses to move to Memphis. They paid businesses to stay in Memphis. And at one point, they decided that what Memphis needed more than anything else was an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the Mississippi River. So Memphis went and built a pyramid and then went looking for a basketball team, right? What basketball team do you cheer for here? Is it all college, or do you have a pro team that you resonate with? New Orleans, maybe? I don't know. Christian, you basketball guy? No?
We're not basketball people down south.
Football.
Football.
I found that out today. Someone started talking about, what are the colors? Blue and orange is like going on, and I'm like,
That's a good color.
like we're the Gophers. That's not going to scare anybody. So Memphis was able to get the Vancouver Grizzlies to relocate to Memphis. The problem was when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like the stadium. The city of Memphis wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away from here. This one sat empty for over 15 years. I'm going to show you in a minute what they got done with it, but this is the quintessential orderly but dumb, right? You can see the people sitting in the meeting deciding collectively what like the right course of action would be, and then going out and selling the public on it. Here's how we're going to create prosperity. Here's how we're going to do this. Here's how this is going to work. Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is a little street in Memphis, Tennessee called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue was a former streetcar stop when the city was going through this kind of conversion into this new way of building. They went and they ripped out the streetcar line. They ran a highway through the middle of this neighborhood. Without the streetcar traffic, without people being able to walk, these stores just died. They were sitting empty. Some neighbors were fed up with the decline and neglect. They went out, they worked with the property owners to get them swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They put out some planters and some benches temporarily. They painted their own bike lanes. They painted their own crosswalks. For one weekend, they invited businesses from around the community to come in and open up shop and just show the neighborhood what this place could look like. They didn't ask permission. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They figured that by the time anybody gets mad and tries to kick us out, we're going to be gone anyway. Let's just go out and do it. And so they did. Two different approaches. Here are the results. That pyramid building is now a Bass Pro Shop. That cost them an additional $204 million in subsidy from the state and local government to make that conversion happen. That chaotic block, $15 million in new investment, 50% increase in rent, 25 new businesses, 25 properties removed or renovated, and 17 removed from their blighted list. Total investment on the left side, hundreds of millions of dollars. Total public investment on the right side, zero. Which return on investment would you rather have? Chaotic but smart. What we are finding out, what we are discovering is that following decades of us chasing the big project, expanding out, growing our cities out, bigger, what we're finding is that there's tons of money to be made going back into our core neighborhoods and making small incremental investments. These places are really, really powerful. They're powerful because they build on the kind of traditional way that we have created success in neighborhoods. We are used to today neighborhoods being built all at once, and when they're built, they're done. They're finished. This is a snapshot in time that has never happened anywhere else in human history. Nowhere else have we built places, and when we build them, we believe that they will never change. That is a uniquely modern American set of beliefs. All throughout human history, Places were built incrementally on a continuum of improvement. So places would start very small, like this little block here. This is my hometown in 1870. And they would grow incrementally. They would grow incrementally up, they would grow incrementally out, and they would become incrementally more intense. This is 30 years later, the same exact block. And after another 40 years of growing incrementally, what you would see is a block would become something like this. When we think about our places as stagnant, what we're doing is we're condemning them to decline. If you can't improve, if you can't grow, if you can't change, if you can't adapt, there's only one possible outcome. And it might take one generation, it might take two, it might take 1 decade, it might take 5. But if you can't improve, there's only one way to go. And this is what we see time and time again with the American development pattern. I'm gonna take a diversion here and help you think through this once, because it's a hard concept to grasp, but once you have it, it makes infinite sense. Everybody in this room has heard of Ferguson, Missouri, right? Ferguson, Missouri is where Michael Brown was shot by the police officers. There was unrest and riots following that. There were some Department of Justice reports. There were a lot of very striking things about this case. What I want to focus on is a couple of facts. When you look at the St. Louis area immediately after World War II, when they began the auto commuting suburbs, the very first ones to be built included Ferguson, Missouri. In the 50s and 60s, this was the place where the rich people lived. This was the brand new, shiny place on the edge of town. And what happened is the pattern that we have seen repeated over and over again. When we build places like this, what we see is that they experience a generation of growth, where they're the shiny new place, and then a generation of of stagnation, where they kind of hold on, sometimes using debt, sometimes using regulation, try to hold on to what you got. And then, as decline starts to set in, what happens? The people who have affluence move on to the next place. And the place goes into rapid decline. There's a clear reason why this occurs. If you go out and you build a subdivision of homes, you go out and build 40 homes in a spot all at the same time, and then you fast forward 25 years, what are you gonna see? You're gonna see everybody's roof go bad at the same time. You're gonna see everybody's sidewalk go bad at the same time. You're gonna see everybody's appliances fail within a couple of years of each other. Everything is on the same time clock to fall apart. And the thing is, when you can't take a single family home in a neighborhood that's entering into decline and do anything with it except have a single family home, what are your options? If you can't take that and convert it into a duplex and make it a higher level use, improve the use on that property, what do? Well, you have the option as someone buying a house to buy a single family home in a declining neighborhood, or you can go buy a single family home in a brand new neighborhood that property values are going up. What are you gonna do? What you see is that when you get into that second generation of these places, there's a stratification. The people with affluence leave, and the people left behind are poorer. And so when you hit the third life cycle then, which is where Ferguson is now, what you see is that the place is overwhelmed with debt because they've used debt to kind of hang on, and everything is falling apart. So you have a city that spent $900,000 paying interest on their debt. The same year they paid $50,000 for sidewalk maintenance. There's a reason why people don't walk on the sidewalks. There's a reason why people walk in the streets in Ferguson. This is the pattern that we see in suburb after suburb after suburb. Back in 2000 census, we had 1,100 census tracts in persistent poverty. That means persistent poverty is more than a decade of at least 20% of your population living below the poverty rate. By the time we got to the 2010 census, that had tripled to 3,300 census tracts. More and more suburban tracts, those early suburbs, not holding up over time. When you stagnate places, when you don't let them change and grow and evolve, there's no place for them to go but down. This pattern took care of that. And it wasn't always great. Places didn't always grow. They weren't always shiny. They didn't always come in. But what they did is they didn't fall off a cliff. They didn't decline rapidly. They would reach a plateau and stay there. And then they'd reach a plateau and stay there. And then reach a plateau of success and stay there. That's these different stages that you see. What you have here is a very kind of prudent, I'm going to use the word conservative. I mean that in like the old-fashioned Sunday school teacher kind of way. A very prudent, low-risk kind of way of investing. What happens if you started to build a city and you were at this point here and like things didn't work out? Did people lose a lot of money? No, you don't have a whole lot invested here, right? These are like modest little investments. The idea of going from here to here and then again from here to here is just a little jump. It's a little jump up the scale. I showed this at the last presentation I gave, and I want the people who didn't see that to see this because it's a startling image. And I'm only going to show this one example. There's a number of them I showed last time to kind of drive this point home. But this one is I think the most startling to our senses because it defies what we think we know about cities and about places. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. This one I've labeled old and blighted. The one over here I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, they're the same size, the same area, they have the same amount of public infrastructure. That old and blighted block looks like this. It actually looks like that today because there's snow. This is in the 1920s as my city was growing out. This is the 3 blocks here were the 3 blocks on the far edge of town. This is the essentially cheapest building you were going to build out on the edge of town. And what you were hoping if you built this was that the city would continue to incrementally grow, incrementally become more wealthy, the center of town would grow, the neighborhoods would grow, and over time, your little tiny kind of pop-up shack investment would become worth more, and you would build a second story, a third story, the buildings would become more intense, more ornate. Maybe you'd tear it down and start over, which you could do because the land value would be worth so much more. This is that virtuous cycle. That's not what happened, right? These were built in the 20s. What happened after that? The Great Depression, World War II, and now we have a completely new style of development. We just skip right over this and we start building out on the edge. I'm going to point out one other thing here too. Hold that for a sec for me. When you build a city in this pattern, what you are doing is you are using improving land values to drive redevelopment. So I showed you those little shacks, right? And I said the little shacks became this street. Why did they become that street? It's because the more people that were there, the more stuff that was going on, that street became really valuable. And the land values became really high. So high that people looked at that little shack and said, ugh, I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna rip down that little shack and I'm gonna build a 3-story saloon hotel in the center of town, a block from the railroad track stop. That was a wealthy place to be, right? And after another 40 years, because all the growth happened incrementally on the edge, happened in the neighborhoods, happened in town, that land value became more valuable yet. The land value in the center of town was really high. Out on the edge of town, not so high. Center of town, a block from the railroad stop, really high. And what happened is at some point someone looked around and said, you know what? I'm gonna buy that old 2-story hotel and saloon, and I'm gonna put a big old bank there with marble columns and granite on the inside. What we did after World War II, and this is public policy, and there's a reason why we did it, there's a bunch of social reasons why we did this. What we did is we freed our economy from the tyranny of increasing land values. If you think about the automobile development pattern, running highways and roads all over the place, what did that do? It freed up more land for development. And Econ 101, supply demand, says if you dramatically increase supply of something, developable land, what happens to the cost of that? It goes way down. And so what we did, and the reason why you see cities after World War II implode in the center, is that we took land values and cratered them. We cratered them. We made the center of town not any more valuable than the stuff a mile out on the edge. And so that redevelopment stopped. It should have continued here. But what we did is we drove down the land values. We did this for these whole 3 blocks. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. We went in, we got it torn down, and now we have the new taco drive-through place, right? Parking lot, sign, 2 drive-through lanes. This meets all the ordinances, all the codes. Everything about this says success in terms of the way we value things today. This was a big deal. They put this on the front page of the Economic Development year-end report. Seriously, I'm not joking you. Here's the problem that nobody bothered to look at. That old blighted block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, it's the same size area, it's got the same public cost, right? It's only valued at $618,000. The city's actually collecting 78% more taxes from that rundown, junky old block. Now here's the interesting thing. I pointed this out to the city. I pointed this out to the economic development officials. And you know what their reaction was, right? They got mad. And I understand that reaction. We all feel defensive when we do something really stupid, right? And people point it out. But their comeback to me was, okay, Chuck, what would you have done differently? What would you have done differently? And I struggled with that for a long time because the question was, Taco John's is coming in, Taco John's wants this block, they want to rip everything down and build this new thing. What would you have done differently? And I struggled because I was stuck on Taco John's. And really it took me a while to step back and realize that the problem was not that thing. The problem was that we accept decline as normal. We have grown to accept the decline of the neighborhood as a natural state of affairs, because we see it in neighborhoods all over the place. We have accepted the decline as normal. So what we did is we flipped that question around and said, what if we were not going to accept decline as normal? What would we do differently in this neighborhood? I'm going to skip this one. No, I have to do it because I can't explain the next one unless I do. Do you guys remember this one? I'm going to go through this one quick. I'm going to have to walk up here because I got to point to a couple things. So excuse my pretentiousness by standing up here. This is a map. Let me give you like the 30-second version of this. This is a map that myself and some colleagues with a group called Urban 3 put together for the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. This is a profit and loss map. For those of you that are red-green colorblind, this is not making much sense to you right now. I'm going to walk you through this real quick. What we did is we looked at every expense that the city had, from road maintenance to fire department to transit to fixing pipes. We looked at every expense, and then we looked at every revenue source the city had, from property tax to utility fees to sales tax, and we mapped them all out. And at the end, we mashed all those maps together. And what we came up with were an identity of where the properties that were making the city money, in other words, the properties that were paying more in taxes than they required in services, and the properties that required more money in services than they were paying in taxes. The ones that are green are essentially profitable. The ones that are red are not. The higher the line goes up, the more the disparity is. Right here in the middle, where my pointer sits, it's kind of annoying. This whole area right in here is green. That is Lafayette's core downtown. If you've ever been to Lafayette's core downtown, they would kill to have your downtown. It is not a great place. Very few people go there to hang out. No one visits Lafayette and goes and takes photos of their downtown and sends them home, right? It's not a great place, but yet financially it's doing fantastic. There's a crescent of green that starts down here and ends up there. It goes around this swamp area here, basically. That is all green. Those areas are profitable. They are paying more in taxes than they're getting in services. Those are the poorest parts of town. Those are the bad neighborhoods. When we went there to get an Airbnb, we were going to stay there for a week and work. The city staff said, don't go to that part of town. That's where the homicides happen, the burglaries happen. That's the bad neighborhoods. Financially, it's doing awesome. All this other stuff out here is red. All this stuff, all that up there, all that up top. What is that stuff? That's the big box stores, the strip malls, the franchise restaurants, the suburban, windy subdivisions with the dead-end cul-de-sacs. That's what that stuff is. Just for some context, the typical resident in Lafayette pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They pay other taxes to other places. Is that yours? But they pay $1,500 a year to the city. In order for the city to make good on every promise, in other words, to keep fire protection and police protection, to fix the pipes when they break, to replace the pumps when they break, to fix the potholes and the sidewalks, taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year for the median house to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes would need to get sent to the city to maintain stuff. That's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And so at some point in the future, the city of Lafayette, and actually they're having to do this right now, so is your city, by the way, in case you don't know, the city of Lafayette in the future is going to have to decide what roads to fix and what roads to let go bad. What pipe to repair and what pipe to let go. What neighborhoods to take care of and what neighborhoods to let fall apart. We have, cities in North America that are going through this. One very prominent city that is going through this. You all know which one I'm talking about, right? Detroit is far down this path. I'll give you my 30-second explanation of Detroit. Detroit in the early 1900s was the Motor City. They were the first ones to really adopt this development pattern. They were the first ones to have auto commuters from the edge of town driving in. They're the first ones to create the auto suburb out on the edge. Detroit is 20 years ahead of everybody else. When we hit the Depression, every city went like this, except Detroit. Detroit kept kind of going like this. Not as robust as they were, but they kept going. And so after World War II, what was clear to everybody in the policy field was that if you wanted to be successful, what you needed to do is follow Detroit's model. And we all adopted it everywhere, across the entire continent. We're all 20 years behind Detroit. That's what Lafayette's showing you. Now I want you to keep that map image in your mind, because I'm gonna refer back to it here on the next thing. If we're gonna talk about a different project development process, a different way of deciding how to spend our capital dollars, instead of having the smoke-filled room or the spreadsheet-filled room now, what we do, where a few people at the top make these decisions and then go out and sell it to everybody. How would we do this differently? And it starts with reimagining what our investment portfolio looks like. I want to talk to you about the difference between a banker and a venture capitalist. Because a lot of us don't think about this, but there's a huge mental difference between the two. A banker is a very conservative kind of profession. And again, I mean conservative as in the Sunday school teacher, right? Banking at its essence is a very conservative business. If you want a loan from a bank, you have to have what? Collateral. Why? Because they don't want to lose a penny. There's a saying or a bad joke. The only people who can really get a loan are the people that don't actually need a loan. If you are desperate and need a loan, you'll never get a loan, right? Banking follows the 363 business model. We borrow money at 3%, we lend it out at 6%, and then we get out on the golf course by 3 p.m. That's the 363 model. It's a very safe, very conservative business. The idea is that we don't want to lose any money. We just want to have safe, stable returns. Banking mentality. What is a venture capital mentality? A venture mentality is absolute opposite of a banker mentality. The venture capital mentality is, I have a safe store of value here, and I want to grow it. So the way I'm going to grow it is take a small amount that I can afford to lose, and I'm going to invest that in things that have a very high upside potential. I'm going to take a little bit of my wealth, a little bit of my savings, and I'm going to invest it. And maybe I'll invest it in a bunch of little things, knowing that if I make 10 investments, 5 of them will just fail completely. They'll be worth 0. Maybe 3 of the 10 I can break even on. But 1 or 2 of them are going to be so spectacular that they will make up for everything that I've lost, and then some many times over. This is a venture capital mentality, and it's really, really successful. When you talk to investors, people who manage money, there's a strategy called the barbell strategy. When you invest your money, let me try this. People in this room have retirement savings. They have money set aside. You go talk to a financial advisor. They will try to gauge, what is it, the term? They'll gauge your suitability for risk or whatever. They will often present you like a continuum, and they'll say, you can have really risky investments or you can have really safe investments. Where would you like to be on this linear continuum? And then you'll point to somewhere in the middle, and they'll say, oh, wise choice. We'll get you a balanced portfolio that is not too risky and not too... And everybody walks out kind of happy with that, right? Like, I don't want to be the prude and take no risk at all. You know, I want to have a little bit of risk, but I don't want to be crazy risky, because this is my savings after all. You are known as a sucker in the Wall Street vernacular. You are known as the fool. You're the sucker at the card table. When investors who have wealth invest money, they follow this strategy here, the barbell strategy. They don't try to be way in the middle. What they do is they have part of their portfolio that is banker, a large part of their portfolio that's banker, and a small part of their portfolio that is on the other end of the barbell and is very risky. Why would you do it like this? Because what happens is, when you have a large part of your portfolio over on this side of the barbell, very low risk, what you're doing is you're limiting your downside exposure. You're never going to lose everything. There's a limit to what you can lose. You're never going to go broke. You're going to keep that capital. But by having money over on this side of the ledger, what are you doing? You're exposing yourself to upside potential. This is the approach that gives you the least downside risk with the most chance for gain. Okay? How would we do this as a city? If we wanted to have a barbell strategy for a city, how would we do this? Where is your sure bet? Where's your sure bet? If you're going to invest $1 million on a capital project, where is your sure bet? Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to Lafayette. Where's your sure bet? Okay? Look at this for a sec. Where's your sure bet? You've got a downtown that's already profitable. You have these declining, poor neighborhoods where literally like the streets are cracked, the sidewalks are cracked, there's disinvestment, but they're profitable. Where are your no-lose investments? Yeah, that's where they're at. You should be able to go into those neighborhoods and fix the streets and repair the sidewalks and fix the pipe, and every dollar you spend, you are not going to lose money. Why? Because those places are already profitable. They're already making you money. There is no reason why your downtown should ever want for maintenance. It's already making you money. That would be like, having a business and you got 4 divisions that are losing money and 1 division that's making you money. And you decide to take money from the profitable division and let it go bad while you try to prop up the other ones, right? That's ridiculous. So if we're going to act like bankers, what we do is we take our low-risk, steady returns and we invest a huge portion of our portfolio into making sure those places don't decline. Making sure the sidewalks are fixed, making sure the potholes are filled, making sure the crosswalks are painted, making sure the streetlights are on, making sure they don't decline. Because letting them decline is financially really dumb. These are your cash cow neighborhoods. What do we do with the other 5% then, right? What do we do with the stuff on this end of the barbell? What does that look like? Well, this is what we tried to figure out in this neighborhood. In this neighborhood with the Taco Johns, when they said, Chuck, what would you do differently? So what we did is we went out in this neighborhood, and it just skipped way ahead for me. We went out in this neighborhood and we spent a whole year in this neighborhood looking, just observing. We sat out there, we would take a table out at lunch and we would set it up in a parking spot and just, spend the afternoon out there working and, watch people in the neighborhood. We would take our lunch breaks and just go walk through the neighborhood or go bike through the neighborhood. By the way, my house is right about here, right just off the screen here, and my office is right here. This is the old and blighted block right here, and there's the Taco John's. I look out my office window at these two places. So that's me right there. So we would just go out and bike through this neighborhood and walk through this neighborhood. And what we were doing is we were observing people. And we were observing where people struggled. And then we would go out and we would try things. We noticed this one intersection where people would, get up there and then they would be all freaked out and then they would run across. We said, are there things we can do here to help this out? And we took and made everybody mad. We went out and we put flags. We just got PVC pipe and we put a cap on the end and glued it all up and strapped it to the stop signs at the intersection or the street signs. And we put orange flags in them. And said, if you don't feel safe, just wave a flag when you walk across. It's really dumb and it's really demeaning, but it's also really effective, And people started to use them to cross there. The county engineer got really mad at me because it was a county street they were crossing. He wanted to have lunch with me, and I went and had lunch with him, and he said, you have to take those out. And I said, I'm not taking them out. And he said, you have to. You're giving people a false sense of security. You're encouraging people to cross. And I'm like, sorry, there's kids here. You're the bleep that put a crosswalk there, right? You're indicating to people it's okay to walk while you got cars going through at 45 miles an hour. What are you doing? You're the one who made a wide highway road there. I'm not taking them out. He said, if you want them out, you go take them out. He never took them out, right? We saw a bunch of kids walking through the alley a day after it rained, muddy, messy. Like, what are you guys doing? Oh, Mom told us it's not safe to walk out on the street. She wants us to take the alley to get to school. The cars go too fast out there. So we went out and we did a speed study out there. We saw, in a 2-hour period of time, 2 out of 3 cars drove over 30 miles an hour. So we went out in the middle of the night, like 4:35 in the morning, and we took chalk and we painted in narrower lanes just to see what would happen. And then we went out during the day and we took speed study, and what we found is that in the same 2-hour period, a week later, out of like 280 cars, only one went over the speed limit. Narrower lanes slowed down the traffic. So we just kept trying things like this. We engaged the public. We had a scavenger hunt. We had a block party. We just tried to get people out and get them involved and figure out what is working in this neighborhood and what's not. And it was never, ever, ever going out and telling people things. It was always going out and observing. Not really even, we would talk to people and we would ask them things to get clarification, but what we're really doing is observing to try to understand where people were struggling to do things in the neighborhood. And then at the end of the summer, we came up with a list of 8 projects that the city could do to nudge the neighborhood in a better direction, to stop the decline and get things moving in a different way. So here's our 8 projects. And I'm going to go through each one, but let me get you oriented a little bit so you know where we're at. I said, here's my office, here's the old and blighted block and the taco place. There's a north-south kind of backbone street that runs through here and an east-west one that runs through here. These are the two kind of main streets through the neighborhood. There's the neighborhood school right there. By the way, my grandmother went to that school. My mother went to that school. I went to that school. My kids, my Stella, youngest one, just finished her last year at the school last year. So that school right there. There's the mall. That's where I sat on Santa's lap. It is now not a mall. It's like a something else. There's a grocery store attached to the end of it. That used to be a Montgomery Ward's. Now it's a grocery store. This is our like McDonald's stuff here along the highway. This is all residential neighborhood. So you're kind of oriented where we're at. Let me show you these projects. So we're going to do project 1 first. Project 1 is that east-west main road through the neighborhood. This was the one where the mom didn't want the kids walking on it. What we found is that the traffic does drive really fast. This is a very wide road. There's no pavement markings at all. It is essentially a big drag strip through the middle of the neighborhood, and people avoided it. And not only did people avoid it, but the homes that were on it would do everything they could to like buffer themselves from it. You think of a nice tree-lined street with front porches and interaction with the street. What you would see here is that people would put up fences and bushes and like try to face things the other way. This is a nasty street. So we went out and we measured. Here's how wide this is in theory. 14-foot lanes, this is really, really excessively wide. What we said is, we did a little study, we showed that this works. Let's go out with some paint and let's just narrow up the lanes. Let's just put some edge friction in with some paint. We could use that extra space for bikes if you want, you don't have to. Just narrow up the lanes and use that as a device to slow traffic down a little bit. Perpendicular to this street is First Avenue. It looks just like this. People get sometimes excited. They're like, wow, Chuck, you have got light rail or a streetcar? No, we have the railroad depot's up there. This was the old tired line that went out to the paper mill. Paper mill closed when I was a kid. This line is still in there. Because someday, so it's there right now. The only way to, there is no, in the modeling program, there is no model for abandoned railroad track. So we have to use this. Just imagine like that's not there and you just have that. So what you've got is you've got that, and then you've got two 16-foot lanes and then 8-foot parking lanes on the side. You can see nobody parks here. This is just a huge drag strip. People drive ridiculously fast. So what we said is let's take the same concept, let's create some edge friction here, but instead of putting the parking on the very edge and then have the bikes between the cars, there's no sidewalk at all along here. So let's try to, if there's going to be a parked car, have it moved out a little bit and just create some additional buffer between people who would be walking and biking, give them like a somewhat safe space out on the edge away from where the cars drive. Let's just make this a little bit safer. And indeed, what we saw when people would walk along here, car would come down here and you got plenty of room, people would start to like get over on the edge, right? Like they'd stand on the edge ready to jump off when the car would come down there because they'd go so fast. Here's the third project. This is where the mall is. That's the grocery store that I told you about. What we found is that there's a lot of people that walk through here to get to the grocery store. There's a lot of people that walk through here. And when they're walking through here, the cars are going really fast this way. There's a handicap sign, which is really kind of bizarre because nobody's coming here. It's like they're telling, yeah, hey, handicapped people, we know you're there. What we found is that up at the grocery store, what they had done there is they had taken in front of the store and painted cross-hatching on the ground. And the cross-hatching had the effect of like signaling to drivers that there's going to be people kind of walking through here randomly. So just be aware. And what we observed was that people drove slower through those areas. So what we said is because people are crossing here, there's no sidewalk, there's no crosswalk, there's no designated crossing, let's just take that concept and bring it out to this intersection and hatch that so that we just note that there'll be stuff going on here. A couple blocks south of there, we have the same crossing of the same street. people would go through these two areas and then end up over at the grocery store. This is the other one right here. Again, cars going really, really fast through here. We put a temporary crosswalk in here and then sat and interviewed people when they would come through. We would talk to them and just say, did that help? Did it make it better? It was a very low cost intervention. So we said, let's go out and put a crosswalk in there so that we've got a designated crossing. We put the flags up and all that kind of thing. Once people would get across then, same street, what we would see is that they would walk down here, either on the edge here, on the edge here. This street is really, really wide, theoretically, so there could be parking along it. No one has ever parked there my entire life. There's a big, huge parking lot here. There's a big, huge parking lot on the other side of that building. No one parks here, but that's how wide it is. You see how wide that curve radius is? Cars come through here at like 30, 35 miles an hour, whip around that corner. And when they do, the people who are walking along the side, we would see people who would dive into the ditch, snow up to their knees. They would dive into the snow to get off the street when the cars would come through there. We said, okay, let's give them a chance. So we said, let's put on the 10 feet on the north side, let's put a double white line in, and then the rest will be okay for cars. That still leaves two 16-foot auto lanes. So like really, really wide auto lanes, much wider than you need. But it gives this safe space here for people who are making this journey around. Here is the park. The neighborhood has one park. In the time that we were there, we never saw, outside of scheduled organized activities, so the city has a softball game. Outside of that, never saw a single kid in the park. This neighborhood is full of kids, not a single kid ever in this park, ever. There were a lot of complaints about drugs being sold in this park. The police department wanted to install cameras as a way to monitor and catch things. We said, this is the view from the street of the park. We said, you know what, let's just go out and trim up the trees. One of the things that we find is that nefarious activity tends to happen in places that are not visible. And one of the best things to do to improve safety in a park, as well as, by the way, improve property values in homes, is to open up the park so you can actually see in. So we said, we've got people with houses that face the park. One of the ways to passively police it is just to open it up so people can see in. No one's going to be selling drugs out there if the park's wide open and anybody coming by can see what's going on. Once you get into the park, then it looks like this. You can see why not a lot of people hang out there. What we said is that this park just needs some TLC. We need to plant some seedlings out in the outfield. It's going to take a while, out past the fence. Get them grown up so that they kind of shade. That's our dead industrial paper mill. That's the paper mill right there. We want to get some screening in out there. Let's get some stuff planted. Let's get a few trees planted along the baselines here so that people can sit in the shade and maybe watch a softball game. Let's take better care of the grass. Let's just make this a little bit nicer, right? And then our last project. In this entire neighborhood, there's one street that stood out as having really great, what we would call in the business, really great bones. It has great structure. When you go down this street, not a lot of the old houses have been ripped down. There's a couple that have been, and stuff that's replaced them is really bad. But most of the street still has its kind of core intact. So what you have is you have a house that's oriented towards the street. A lot of them have front porches, or at least a front vestibule. The door opens to the front, so it's front facing. Then you have a sidewalk, you have that on both sides. Then you have a boulevard with a row of trees, and then you have a narrow street. This is a beautiful street for a couple of reasons. One, it's a street that the school is on, and I think that has kind of tempered the zealousness to rip everything down and widen it out. The other thing is that this used to be the street that the streetcar went down. My little city of 13,000 back in the 1940s and 50s had a streetcar. The streetcar went through this neighborhood and came down this street, right down the middle of the street. And so this was one of the prime streets back in the day, and that still kind of holds. There's one thing really wrong with this street, though. Can you see it from the photo? Back in the 80s, we had Dutch elm disease come through, And a lot of those kind of majestic trees got wiped out and taken down. The city maintenance people decided they hate trees. They don't want them anywhere near the city street. And so they refused to go put them back in. They had a city policy of not replacing the trees. There's a study out of Portland, and I say that at the lack of my, risk of my credibility. There's a study out of Portland that says for every tree you have in a neighborhood, every tree you have along a street, you increase the value of the adjacent property by $9,000. Okay, that's Portland. Portland is crazy. We're not Portland. We're not pretending to be Portland. But let's say that that's off by a factor of 10. Let's say it increases property values by $900 to have a tree. The tree costs like $50 to get and put in, right? Like, let's do that. That makes a lot of sense. So what we did is we went up and down the street and we calculated that this street needed 75 street trees that we could plant in here and work with the property owners to get them watered and get them cared for and start to restore this canopy again. Get that street canopy back, because the street canopy provides shade, it cools the temperature of the street, it makes it more beautiful, it provides this great framing. Let's get that street canopy back. So here's my 8 projects. Now, the city went through and we did the $7.1 million project. In fact, we just finished it this last fall. When we went out to bid, the actual bids came in at $14 million. At that point, we had accepted the state money, and so we had to go forward with the project. We did some crazy thing where we borrowed a bunch of money, and now the utility department's paying it back under some goofy thing. The project has been, and this doesn't always happen, but it seems like it, the project has been a total disaster. The contractor, it has been terrible. The pipe leaked. It didn't pass the air tests. They fixed it, then it didn't pass the air tests again. They dug it up, they re-dug it up. They spent basically this entire summer trying to fix it and get it going, and now they say they've got it done, and they finalized the project, something like $14.5 million. Here's the total cost of our projects. $16,700. What happens if we go out and spend $16,700 in this neighborhood addressing the problems that we have observed people struggling with, trying little things to make this neighborhood a little bit better? What happens if we go out and we spend that money trying these things and nothing gets any better? What then? What if it signals to nobody that somebody cares about this neighborhood? Maybe I should buy a house in this neighborhood. Maybe I should buy a property and fix it up and rent it out. Maybe I would like to live in this neighborhood. It seems to be on the up and up. What if none of that signaling happens and the neighborhood continues into decline? What then? Well, we're out $16,700. Remember, we're venture capitalists in this mindset. Not a big deal, because we still have most of what we're spending in our, profitable neighborhoods, building our wealth, ensuring that we're never going to drop any further, right? But now we know 8 projects that are not going to work. Next year we go try 8 new things. And we try 8 new things and 8 new things. And we don't just do this in this neighborhood. We do it in every neighborhood. We go out to the north side of town, the south side of town, the northeast neighborhood, the southeast neighborhood, and we do these little things, or we go out and we humbly observe where people are struggling, and we ask ourselves, what's the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? That's what we do. That's taking that project development process and flipping it on its head. And this is the kicker. Not only are these the highest, the lowest risk, highest returning financial investments that we can make. In other words, if all we cared about was the finances of the city, this is what we would do. But the side benefit of this approach is what? We're actually improving the quality of life for people. We're actually making people's lives better. I said this last time and it got quoted in your paper. I'm happy to say it again. I'm not trying to antagonize people here. I'm not trying to speak poorly of this community. I love the energy here. I love the reception of these ideas. But I've looked at your project list for your Triumph money and it makes me sad. It makes me sad because it is a bunch of orderly but dumb projects. It is not the mindset of a banker. It is not the mindset of a venture capitalist. Kevin, are you writing this down? Okay. Can I say something and not have it be in the paper? Can I say one thing off the record? Okay. It is not the mindset of a banker. It is not the mindset of a venture capitalist. I said that on the record. Now here's what's off the record. It is the mindset of like a drunken sailor on a weekend holiday. Right? Okay, Kevin. I'm back on the record then. It's the mindset of a drunken sailor on a holiday weekend. It's like, what we got money, what do we spend it on, right? We can do so much better here. We can do so much better. And my suggestion, when I was asked the last time I was here, what would you do with this money? These kind of projects are everywhere, but you won't find it when the money's burning a hole in your pocket. I would put this money in an endowment, and I would set up a methodical way to go about and do this. That's what I would do. Jane Jacobs is a revered urban thinker, made this kind of immortal quote now. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. We have to get away from this top-down, centralized project development process and recognize that the healthiest cities, the strongest cities, are ones that are co-created. And I don't mean that means have a bunch of neighborhood meetings, go ahead if you want to. I don't mean that means go and do surveys and ask everybody what their pet project is and then go out and do that. I mean, actually go out and make your obsession not what the grant program is, not what the big project is. Make your obsession the actual lives of people in the community. And if we can do that, we can't help but make great investments. Thank you so much for having me tonight. We went a little bit longer than I thought, but Christian, how long do we get to stay here?
You want to take a few
I'm
questions?
happy to do that. If you guys have some questions for me, I am happy to entertain that. If 8:30 is past your bedtime and you have to leave, you won't offend me in any way. If you, just one quick thing, I'm gonna put a bunch of my cards up here. I don't think I did this last time, maybe I did. If you would like to be on our mailing list, I know a lot of you are now. If you'd like to be on our mailing list and you wanna leave me your address, your card, I'll put you on our list. If you don't have a card and you wanna take mine and email me and we'll put you on the list. So go ahead, you had a question or a comment or? Yeah.
Norway has a sovereign wealth fund.
They
Do
do.
you know of cities and regions that have sovereign wealth funds?
No, not in this country. No, and really, I think like when we talk about doing an endowment, I know cities that have endowments in their name, like that kind of thing. The dangerous thing you run is that the city is a government. And let me tell you what happened in California. California had a serious budget crisis. Well, they just kind of have ongoing crises of all sorts. I want to say it was 2010 when the depths of their budget crisis. And they did this really kind of cruel, destructive, perverse thing. They looked out at all their cities and they said, we just don't have the money anymore, cities. So we're gonna have to cut. You know what I noticed? You have a lot of savings. And you have a lot of savings. You, on the other hand, blew all your savings. You're okay. we're going to give you money. That stinks. That's really destructive public policy. But that's what they did to get through the crisis. So what is the lesson if you're a California city? Don't save any money. If it were me and I could like wave a magic wand and things would happen, I would want to give this to like a foundation to run and manage. And I would want to set up like a separate, Pensacola area nonprofit board, and you could have government people appoint people, you could have, whatever, but you would want an independent group and you'd want to focus their mission on making small neighborhood investments as an endowment. That in an ideal situation, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that could be done. That would be like in an ideal world how something like that would go. Because then you could never have the state come back later and say, you know what, that big chunk of money you got, we're not gonna give you whatever. We're not gonna treat you the same as everybody else because of that. Go ahead, somebody else? Please.
I think you have a pretty good audience here, a repeat audience, it looked like, that, get it and hear what you're saying. I'm really glad that there are political leaders and county leaders here. And I'm just curious if you've ever had a mechanism or any kind of successful tool to take your message to the world that generally doesn't hear this. I guess another way to say my question is, if we were to take what you apply to the Pensacola area, another way to say it would be highly controversial, be frowned upon in a big way and in the paper in a great way, and that would be saying, stop investing in PACE and Navy Federal Credit Union and get back down to downtown where we already have, there's too much going on downtown. That's our story.
Yeah.
Have you ever found anything that through that controversy?
I'm going to give you what you might be a cop-out answer for you, but I'm in my 10th year of doing Strong Towns. Like we just started. I started 9 years ago writing what has become Strong Towns movement. What is my strategy? This is my strategy. 9 years ago, I would show up to a place like this to give a talk, and 2 people would be there, right? And 3 years ago, it was 20 people, and now it's 80 people. And the other day, we had 450 people. Here's how this works. You have to go tell somebody. You have to actually go communicate these ideas to somebody who's not here. And you have to talk about them in your words, in your language, in your local culture. You have to actually start having this conversation. We still publish. We publish 3 times a day, all kinds of material. Quint said he's always on Strong Towns. That's awesome. Everything we do is for you to share and have a conversation with someone else. Some articles, some graphics we put together, some pocket might not be the one you're looking for. But if you dig, you'll find the one you are. And you need to go have a conversation. Because if it just stays with these people in this room, it's dead, it's done. No one's gonna go, this is crazy stuff. This is like such a different paradigm, it's crazy. The only way it becomes not crazy is if we start to talk about it amongst each other. The reason I'm here, it's not like because the hospital invited me. I actually get invitations like that all the time. I rarely do them. The reason I accepted this one is because I love that guy back there. I love the paper you work for and the stuff you're doing. Your publisher, or your editor is, committed to having this community dialogue. I love Quint, and I love his energy, and I love his vision, and I love the fact that he is behind the scenes pushing a community dialogue, not a community outcome, but a community dialogue. And I love the fact that when I look at the stats on our website, I see tons of people from this area logging in and taking part and having a conversation. And I accepted the invitation today so that I could come here and help keep the momentum going. So there's no magic. You gotta just do it.
Did you run into issues with resistance to the gentrification if the neighborhood starts?
Yes.
And how
Yes. So let me make sure we all have the same term. The question was, do you run into issues of gentrification and resistance because of gentrification? Gentrification is a process by which properties become more valuable, and because they become more valuable, the people who have lived there can no longer afford to live there, and they get pushed out. Yes, we see that. Let me tell you where we see that the most. We see that in urban areas like New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Vancouver, Chicago, Philadelphia, in some neighborhoods in Detroit. The thing about, I think Detroit is a good case study to think about. Detroit has so much that's here. We could talk about Detroit all night, because you can buy a house in Detroit for $4,000. There are people living in homes that are owned by investors from outside the community, where the investors bought the home for $4,000 at auction. And they are charging the poor family that lives there $600, $700, $800 a month. And that family is paying it every month. And to make matters worse, that investor is not paying their taxes. So after 7 years of bilking the system, that property goes tax forfeit. The person who's been paying their rent gets kicked out because the county now owns the property, and the investor goes and buys it again on auction. That is happening in Detroit right now, year after year after year. I'm working with the Quicken Loans people there to try to, and they're doing the work. I'm helping them think through this. They're trying to create a program where instead of having to go on the auction, it would get sold to the person who's paying the rent, because they can afford the house. Here's the rub with gentrification, and it's a very touchy issue, because it gets into issues of social justice and what is fair to people. Let me put it like this, though. If your neighborhood doesn't improve in value, like I said earlier, there's only one way for it to go, and that's declining. You don't have a choice between, the same, improvement, or decline. There's not three options. There's only two options on the table: improvement or decline. The question is, what type of improvement are you going to have? Are you going to have improvement where you go from a house in decline to a 6-story condo unit? That's gentrification. If you go to Austin, Texas, they're ripping down single-family homes and they're building 6-story condo units, and nobody can afford to live in the core of Austin, Texas. They've gentrified everybody out of there. They've gentrified out millionaires, okay? Like, they have. It's ridiculous. How do you have property values that appreciate without dislocating masses of people? There's really two elements to it. One, you make your appreciation incremental over time. So instead of, huge, massive leaps, it's small steps every year. So it's never this abrupt shift where all of a sudden I'm paying $500 in rent and the next year I'm $2,000 in rent. Like that was where you kick people out. But second, the more you can help people in the neighborhood become the owners of the neighborhood, the more they experience the gain of that wealth. The more they actually experience the upward mobility of that wealth. And the thing is, you have neighborhoods that are affordable enough where you can actually get people who are low income as owners of some of this stuff. It is very possible. Not necessarily possible, and this is what we're finding in Detroit, not possible on a Wall Street model, because if you want to buy a $4,000 house and then go to US Bank and get a mortgage, your origination fee is more than your house, right? Like, that doesn't work. You're not going to get this thing to work. You have to have local financing options that get your market, invest in neighborhoods, invest in people. Those are the two things we need to do. Please.
I want to ask a question. In your diagram, you know, basically the inner city is subsidizing the suburbs, is what it amounts to. And there are people in the power structure who maybe say, so what, that is working for me. I'm making a profit from that. I'm able to build these things and
Yep.
take my profit quickly. And so how do you, those people tend to be in power. How do you
Yes,
fight that?
I think the biggest challenge that our cities in general have right now today is that when you look at them in aggregate, they're wired to fail. And they're wired to fail because the places that are financially insolvent are the places that have the greatest amount of political influence. The places that are financially solvent, in other words, the places that are paying the freight, are largely the places that are politically disenfranchised. And so what we see is that the people who are getting subsidized will use their power and their connections to string out the length of when they can get subsidized. They will use their position to basically get their road fixed, get their pipe fixed, get things going until the rest of it falls apart. And that's what you see in Detroit. Detroit was unable to reconcile that. So if you go to Detroit today, what you see is a rebirth in a downtown where very wealthy people have made significant investments and seen lots of appreciation. You get way out to the edge where those wealthy people were congregating, and what you see is there's like a wealth firewall, you know, where they got like little pockets of wealthy areas out there, where basically like the whole system's subsidizing them. And then you have this kind of sea of despair in between, where some stuff is coalescing together in an incremental way, but the vast majority of it's falling apart. That's the political conversation that we need to have. That's a political conversation because it's really, it's a really tough one to walk away from the bad investments, really. One more question?
Do you have like an inspiring story where there was like a Triumph Fund and a Drunken Sailor style project plan, and then a bunch of people came in and said, wait?
Do I have an inspiring story where people like you change their mind on stuff? No, not really. I mean, I will give you an inspiring story, but let me answer the question like this. For a long period of time, this development pattern made a lot of sense for us. When I was an engineer, I wasn't doing nefarious things. I thought that I was building a great, strong America. If you had told me that I was bankrupting my city, it would have broke my heart. I knew I was doing the opposite. I knew I was doing good for my community. The people who live way out of town and commute in, they don't think they're getting a free ride. They think they're paying the lion's share of the freight. So I think part of the conversation we got to have is got to, in a way, and I'm going to say this to you as the ambassadors for this message now locally, we have to have this conversation in a way that doesn't put people on the defensive. It can't be like, you know what, you're a taker, you know, like we're subsidizing you, you know. We've got to have this conversation in a nuanced way, because what we need is we need to start shifting the public dialogue, and we're not going to do it by demonizing one thing. What we're going to do it by is starting to support something different. You never, when we shifted from traditional development patterns to the new post-World War II pattern, we didn't do that by having people go around and saying, those traditional neighborhoods are horrible. What they did is they said, look how awesome this is. And people just walked away from that to this. What's going to happen right now, and we see this in some areas, is that people are starting to walk away from some of these bad investments out on, not the way new stuff out on the edge, but some of that, and they're moving downtown. We see that in cities all over the country. So people are already starting to do this. What we have to do is start to have a community dialogue on it, because what is ultimately going to happen is we're not going to fix that road, and that's a tough conversation. Let me give you the inspiring story. I went to the city of Memphis, and the city of Memphis every year would get to the end of the year, and they would annex a whole bunch of land to balance their budget. So we get to the end of the year, they'd have a budget for the next year. We're short $400,000. We're going to go out and we're going to annex in December this whole chunk of land and bring it into the city, because we can count the revenue, but we don't have to count the expenses until the next year's budget cycle. So this would balance our budget. And they did that for decades. They did that year after year after year after year. I went into Memphis. They have a mayor's innovation team. It was funded by a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation. I went in, met with them, worked with them, gave a couple talks like this, wrote up a little paper for them. We ultimately went back and did a workshop with their entire senior and junior staff at City Hall. And to kick off the workshop, the mayor showed up, a guy named A.C. Wharton. And I had sat in A.C. Wharton's office and we had looked at maps and we had talked about how South Memphis, the poorest neighborhood in town, was paying more taxes per acre than the wealthiest new subdivision out on the edge. And we showed that to him. And these were, A.C. Wharton was an African-American man. This is the poorest African-American neighborhood that everybody looked down on. And I'm not saying he did personally, but he looked at this as this is a struggling place. And we showed him, this is the area that's paying the freight. And he showed up at that workshop, and to the newspaper, to the world, he said, we're done annexing property. We are not going to annex another acre. And in fact, in subsequent years now, what Memphis has actually done is de-annexed. They've gone to neighborhoods that said, we don't want to be part of Memphis. And they've said, you know what? That's a good idea. You're losing us a lot of money. And they de-annexed them. They gave them back to the county. That in some ways is like a ruthless move. It's also a really, really smart, prudent move. Those neighborhoods will be fine. Those people are wealthy. They'll take care of themselves. They're starting to focus now on their core neighborhoods and really impact people's lives in a positive way and also improve their city's balance sheet. So to me, Memphis is a real success story of people intentionally doing something different. Thank you so much. I said I've been up since 12:30 a.m. I have. One more.
One last parting question that's really important.
We're going to do really well too. You're going to be proud of us like Memphis. And I guess that what I wanted to say is we're meeting tonight in the middle of a huge area that's a declining area. Mm-hmm. And so I thought you would talk a little bit about that. But if the people in this declining area around here wanted to revitalize Brownsville, for example, what are just a couple of suggestions about that? Now, we can come sit out here and watch what people are struggling with, but what about people from the neighborhood itself? What works in terms of them doing?
Yeah. I'm not licensed in the state of Florida, so they can't take my license away here. Well, let me answer that indirectly. I showed you the story from Broad Avenue in Memphis, the one where they went out and painted their own crosswalks and their own bike lanes and all that. They didn't go ask permission. They didn't go, City Hall and beg and say, will you do this for us? They didn't go say, is it okay if we do this? What they said to themselves is, nobody cares except us. We care. And because we care, we're going to go out and do something. And you know what? If they show up and get mad at us, our response is going to be, where have you been? Where have you been? Where have you been? And the thing is that they didn't do it with spite in their hearts. They actually did it with love for the neighborhood. That street is called Broad Avenue. They actually nicknamed the project A New Face for an Old Broad. So these were people out having fun. They made it fun. And they invited the city to come. They invited, come out and see what we did. They didn't try to hide it. They weren't ashamed of it. They said, you know what? We realize you're strapped and you got other priorities. We're going to take this on ourselves. We're going to do it. We see people struggling. We're going to address it here. To me, I think the worst aspect of our modern development mindset is the notion that we pay our taxes and then someone else is supposed to do something. That was never the way this country was founded, the way it was built, the way we became successful. That was never part of the equation. It was always, we did it. We did it. And I think if we can get that mindset back, and I'm saying, communicate with City Hall. Go and tell them what you're doing. Be excited. Say, hey, we're a positive neighborhood. And if they push back on you, go in with more people. Go to the council meeting and tell them, like, we're ready to do this. We're ready to roll up our sleeves. Let's get this stuff done. I think that the more positivity we can have about our future here, the more we can look at this neighborhood not as a declining neighborhood, but as an asset that is underperforming, is what I would say, an underperforming asset. The more we can start to, I think, inject that new mindset, that different set of positivity about it. I would not wait for permission.
And what you're saying is this neighborhood is paying for things out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I'll add to that, not only is this neighborhood financially really successful and essentially paying the freight for other places, but this neighborhood is just dripping with small investment opportunities that are just waiting for people to do. They're just waiting. They're everywhere. I'll give you one bit of homework that I think will be inspiring for you. If you go to YouTube and type in The Better Block, you will get a series of videos. What you want is a Jason Roberts, The Better Block. And if you can, watch his TED Talk, which is probably the most concise distillation of this. Jason Roberts is 99% pure energy. And you will be incredibly inspired by his story about how he took an underperforming asset of a neighborhood and with a bunch of people and elbow grease and just sheer desire and passion, made some amazing, amazing things happen. And he's in Dallas. If you, is he on your list?
He's on our list right now.
I would add him to your list. He will blow you away. Okay,
Now that you're approaching 24 hours,
I'm gonna go to bed.
right? But knowing how generous Chuck is, I'm sure he'll stay around and do something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks.